They thought they were just arresting another guy who fit the description. But when he showed up in court the next day, not in cuffs, but in a suit, they realized they'd made the biggest mistake of their careers. It was just after 9 a.m. when the call came through dispatch. Black male, mid-30s, navy jacket, suspected in a vehicle break-in on Madison Avenue. Officers Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer were already driving down the block, sipping coffee, half listening. They glanced at each other, amused. "There he is," Brent muttered, nodding toward a man standing outside Grange Bakehouse, one of downtown Boise's busiest cafes. The man looked calm, focused, scrolling through his phone with a pastry bag in one hand. He loosely matched the description. That was enough. Brent parked quickly. No lights, no sirens. Lynn jumped out before the car even stopped. "Hey, hands where I can see them," she yelled. The man, Kenton Moreau, looked up, surprised but not afraid. "Excuse me," he said. "You fit the description of a suspect." "Don't move," Brent added, stepping closer, hand on his holster. "I'm standing outside a bakery," Kenton replied, confused. "Waiting for my driver." Lynn rolled her eyes. "We'll clear it up at the station." Before he could answer, Brent grabbed his arm and turned him around. "You're resisting now," he said loudly enough for people nearby to hear. Phones came out. Kenton didn't resist or speak again. He looked down as the cuffs tightened around his wrists. Lynn smirked. "Funny how they always get quiet once they see the cuffs. Probably another guy with a fake LinkedIn page and a made-up story about his credentials," Brent joked. "They didn't read him his rights, didn't check his ID, his phone, or even the pastry bag with a receipt inside. They just pushed him into the back seat and drove off, laughing about the report they'd file later." Inside the cruiser, Kenton stared straight ahead. "You got anything to say?" Brent asked. Kenton's voice was calm. "I want my phone call." Brent scoffed. "You'll get it after booking." But something in Kenton's steady tone made Brent uneasy. At the precinct, booking was slow. Desk officer Rob Tesh frowned when he saw them bring Kenton in. "You sure about this one?" he asked. "Fits the call. Car break-in." "He was loitering," Brent said. "He was standing outside a bakery," Kenton replied quietly, "with a pastry bag and a phone." Lynn snapped. "You doubting a field call, Tesh?" Rob hesitated but entered Kenton's information anyway. When he looked at the screen, his eyes widened. "This address," Kenton cut in gently. "I'd like my call now." Brent raised an eyebrow. "Who you gonna call, a lawyer?" "No," Kenton said. "The Attorney General's office." Brent laughed. "Sure, tell him we said hi." They walked away, but Rob didn't laugh. He was still staring at the screen. That's when everything started to shift. The holding cell was cold, not freezing, but the kind that seeps into your wrists when you're cuffed. Kenton sat straight on the bench, calm and composed. Even in jeans and a jacket, he looked sharp, clean lines, polished boots, quiet confidence. Down the hall, Brent leaned on a vending machine, sipping soda. "You see the look on his face?" he said. Like he thought he was above it all. Lynn took a sip of her coffee. "That type always does. Shows up in the nice part of town and thinks rules don't apply." Brent chuckled. "My favorite is when they start talking about lawsuits or badges." Neither of them noticed the man from Internal Affairs walk by, or that Rob Tesh had stepped into a back office, speaking on a secure line. Back in holding, Kenton got his call. He didn't scroll his phone. He just dialed. "This is Morrow," he said. "Boise PD, Madison Avenue incident. I'll need everything by this afternoon." Then he hung up. No anger, no noise. Just calm. The call lasted less than 30 seconds, but that was enough. That afternoon, the precinct chief received a quiet email from the State Department of Civil Oversight. A flagged alert requesting immediate release of detainee Kenton Morrow. Attached were federal credentials, database links, and an audit notice under Article 14 of the State Law Enforcement Integrity Act. It didn't come from a lawyer. It came from the Attorney General's liaison. Within 45 minutes, Kenton was free. When Brent saw him again, it was in the hallway, not behind bars, but walking calmly beside two state officials in suits. Brent froze. "That's not possible," he muttered. "What's going on?" Lynn whispered. Rob Tesh watched from his desk, silent, typing something into a system they couldn't access. Kenton didn't look back or smirk. He just walked away, leaving a silence heavier than any siren. That night, Brent complained to his brother over dinner about favoritism and politics. Lynn sat on her porch, beer in hand, telling her girlfriend it was probably a city mix-up. Nobody walks that smooth unless they're hiding something, she said. But as days passed, rumors spread. Someone mentioned Kenton's name during briefing. Two sergeants exchanged uneasy looks. Another officer said Kenton had worked in Oakland, high up in a watchdog group. Even Captain Rolstad acted tense whenever his name came up. Brent started to feel it, the knot in his stomach. If command was nervous, something real was happening. Lynn brushed it off. We got body cam. We got the call log. We followed protocol. Brent nodded, but it felt forced. Something about Kenton didn't fit, not the way they thought. The way he left, with no anger and no drama. That wasn't how the guilty behaved. They went back to work like nothing had changed, but the truth was already moving faster. By the time they realized it, Kenton was already a step ahead, watching everything. The courthouse in downtown Boise wasn't grand. Just glass doors, concrete steps, and the echo of shoes in wide halls. Brent and Lynn walked in side by side, uniforms pressed, badges shining. Routine. They'd done it countless times. The charge read, obstruction of investigation. They expected Kenton to show up late, maybe with a lawyer. But he wasn't outside. He wasn't waiting. He wasn't even listed like a typical defendant. As they passed security, a bailiff stopped them. You two are testifying in courtroom 2C? Yeah, Brent said. Halcroft and Mercer. The Moreau case. The bailiff frowned. Morrow's not the defendant. Brent stared. Come again. The bailiff just pointed. You'll see. When they stepped into courtroom 2C, everything felt off. Not chaotic, not loud, just wrong. The room was full, but not with the usual crowd of nervous defendants and bored lawyers. There were journalists, 2 camera crews, and even someone from the city council. Brent's neck stiffened. Then his eyes locked on the front table. Sitting beside the judge was Kenton Morrow, no cuffs, no defense attorney. Just a man in a dark, tailored suit calmly flipping through a binder. The nameplate in front of him read, Special Counsel for Civil Accountability, State of Idaho. Lynn leaned in. What is this? Brent whispered back, I don't know. This wasn't in the case notes. The judge called the room to order. Today's session concerns a procedural review regarding conduct during a recent arrest on Madison Avenue, she said. Mr. Morrow will serve in an advisory capacity representing the state's Civil Accountability Office. Lynn's jaw tightened. Brent looked like he'd been slapped. Kenton never looked their way, not once. He simply sat back as the judge turned to the front bench. Officers Halcroft and Mercer, please approach. They moved stiffly. Every eye in the room was on them, but not with admiration this time. It was scrutiny. Can you walk us through the reasoning behind your decision to detain Mr. Morrow? The judge asked. Brent cleared his throat. We received a dispatch call, black male, navy jacket. Mr. Morrow had no prior criminal record. The judge interrupted. No history with your department? Was ID checked before detainment? Lynn replied. He fit the description, and he didn't comply when we gave commands. Kenton didn't look up, but he clicked his pen once, slow, deliberate. The judge turned to him. Mr. Morrow, any clarifying points? He looked at them directly for the first time. In my line of work, Kenton began, voice steady. I've read hundreds of reports that start the same way, vague descriptions, unchecked assumptions. And over time, those patterns tell a story. The badge doesn't protect you from accountability. Lynn opened her mouth to speak, but Kenton raised a finger, not to her, but to the judge. I'd like to enter a motion to suspend direct testimony today. Internal review has been authorized. A hearing will follow in 2 weeks. The courtroom went still. Granted, the judge said. Brent and Lynn didn't speak. They stepped back, numb. Kenton gathered his binder, closed it quietly, and stood. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. But his presence was heavier than any argument they could have made. And when he walked out, the press followed. Brent's hands were shaking. Lynn whispered, "What the hell is happening?" But deep down, they both already knew. This wasn't a loss. It was the opening move. Kenton had just flipped the board. Before Boise, before the title and the suit, Kenton Morrow was just another kid trying to keep his head down in Bakersfield, California. His mother, Deirdre, worked night shifts at Mercy Hospital. His father, when he was around, painted houses but never stayed long. By 12, Kenton had learned to live in 2 worlds. One at school, where he aced spelling bees and science fairs, and one outside, where he kept his eyes low when patrol cars rolled by. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. But he watched everything. In 8th grade, a teacher accused him of stealing a calculator. No one else was questioned. His locker was searched. Nothing was found. He said nothing then, but he never forgot how easily suspicion fell on him. It wasn't rage that drove him. It was the pattern. At 17, he earned a scholarship to UC Davis, majored in political science, and wrote essays that cut through the noise. Clean, sharp, precise. Law school came next, Stanford. No connections. No favors. Just grit. While others chased corporate jobs, Kenton interned with the Public Accountability Unit in Alameda County. He listened to officers describe routine stops that ended in bruises and broken ribs. He logged every word. He didn't wear anger like armor. He wore patience like a weapon. By 33, Kenton led reviews for the Western District's Office of Civil Conduct. Case by case, he built a quiet reputation, the kind that made departments nervous. Boise was his first appointment as Special Counsel for Civil Accountability, a role created after watchdog groups pushed for independent oversight. He was handpicked, vetted, confirmed, and kept a low profile. No social media, no speeches, just results. That morning outside the bakery wasn't the first time he'd been profiled, but it was the first time it happened after his appointment. And that changed everything. For once, he wouldn't have to file a complaint. He was the complaint. He didn't want revenge. It was too small. He wanted truth, patterns, exposure, accountability. After the incident, he didn't call reporters. He called a judge, then the Office of Personnel Audits. His badge wasn't brass. It was legislative. It gave him power to open files, pull records, and revisit cases long buried. That's why Brent and Lynn were uneasy. It wasn't about one arrest. It was about all of them. Kenton wasn't just some lawyer they cuffed by accident. He was the one man in the state with both the clearance and the motive to open their entire record. And he didn't need to raise his voice to do it. The precinct felt different. Not louder, just tense. Brent Halcroft noticed first. Conversations stopped when he entered the break room. The kind of silence where people were afraid to be heard saying the wrong thing. He grabbed his lunch and pretended not to notice. Lynn Mercer caught on later. She passed a conference room and saw Lieutenant Schaefer talking to two people in suits. No badges, just a leather folio. Federal types. They went silent when she walked by. That night, Brent's cousin called from Twin Falls. "Hey, you didn't cuff some guy named Morrow last week, did you?" Brent froze. Why? Because his name's blowing up. State Audit Board. Oversight Authority. Whole precinct's on edge. Brent forced a laugh. Nah, just a misunderstanding. He got mouthy. We cleared it. But even he didn't believe it. 2 days later, the captain called them in, formally, in full uniform. Inside were the same two suits Lynn had seen earlier. Officers Halcroft, Mercer, the captain said stiffly. "This is Mr. Granger and Ms. Osai from the Office of Civil Accountability." Ms. Osai's voice was calm, almost cold. "We're opening an internal review regarding an incident that took place last Thursday morning involving Mr. Kenton Morrow." Brent's face went blank. "We already spoke on that." He was released. Case dismissed. But the room stayed quiet. And in that silence, both of them understood this was far from over. Granger spoke calmly. "Nothing else happened? The investigation goes beyond just that arrest." Lynn straightened up. "Excuse me. We're reviewing your records," Granger said. "Complaints, stops, reports filed, and the ones that were changed afterward." Captain Rolstad shifted uncomfortably, then pushed a manila folder across the desk. "You'll both receive subpoenas to appear at the review hearing in 2 weeks." Brent opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lynn swallowed. "Are we being accused of something?" "Not yet," Granger replied. "That's what the hearing will determine." The next morning, both officers received an email. Subject: Case Review Summary, prepared by Special Counsel K. Morrow. It had multiple attachments, old stops, timestamps from body cams, civilian statements, things they thought no one would ever connect. Brent's hands hovered over his keyboard before he clicked. The first file opened to a traffic stop from 3 years ago. Julian York, pulled over for a broken taillight, detained for noncompliance, charges dropped. The body cam footage was listed as not uploaded. York's statement said he was slammed against his car after asking for a supervisor. Brent remembered it, faintly. He closed the file, chest tight. A message popped up from Lynn. "Lynn, they're going to make this look like a pattern." "Brent, it is a pattern." "Lynn, we followed protocol." But even she didn't sound sure. Because Kenton wasn't coming with one case. He had proof of many. This wasn't a review. It was an autopsy. The hearing wasn't held at the precinct or courthouse. It took place in a plain municipal building off Fairview Avenue. Usually, it hosted zoning meetings. Today, every chair in the gray room felt tense. Brent adjusted his tie 3 times before stepping in. Lynn sat in the hallway, staring at a folder she hadn't read in 20 minutes. Inside, about a dozen people sat around a table, legal observers, ethics board members, 2 from the state attorney's office. No uniforms. No allies. At the head of the table sat Kenton Morrow. He didn't look angry. He looked ready. Beside him, Ms. Osai opened the hearing. This is a formal review under Article 14. Officers Halcroft and Mercer are present. Allegations involve abuse of authority and repeated misuse of discretionary stops. She nodded toward Kenton. Special Counsel Morrow, you have the floor. Kenton opened a folder. This isn't about accusations, he said quietly. It's about patterns. He placed a file on the table. Case 1, Julian York. Stopped for a broken taillight. Detained 45 minutes. No charges. Missing body cam footage. Lynn spoke up. That was 3 years ago. Kenton didn't look at her. Case 2, Alan Rivers. Stopped as a robbery suspect. Same report language. Same officers. Detained without cause. No charges. He slid another file forward. Case 3, same pattern. Fit the description. Suspicious behavior. Non-compliant tone. Brent leaned forward. We respond to calls. We don't write the descriptions. But you control the decisions afterward, Kenton said evenly. How long you detain. Whether you check IDs. The way you speak. The number of times people with no record walk away bruised and unheard. He spread out a map covered in red pins. These are all your stops in 5 years. The pins weren't random. They clustered in specific neighborhoods. We compared your data to 3 other patrol teams, Kenton continued. You made 42% more stops. 80% involved the same demographic. 90% led to no charges. Ms. Osai added quietly. That's not policing. That's profiling. Lynn's voice rose. So now we're on trial for doing our jobs? For following protocol. You're not on trial, Kenton said. You're in review. Because this time, you stopped the wrong person. Not someone powerless. Me. He paused, letting it sink in. I wasn't anyone special that day. I was just a man outside a bakery. And you decided that was enough. Brent exhaled. We had a dispatch. We didn't target you. You didn't have to, Kenton replied. The system you follow already does it for you. He looked around the room, then back at them. You can't fix what you refuse to admit. The silence that followed wasn't victory. It was exposure. Every skipped step, every ignored complaint, every lazy report, all of it came back. Because when you make the same mistake again and again, it stops being a mistake. It becomes who you are. By day 2 of the review, Brent was breaking down. His face looked older, his posture tense. He barely spoke to Lynn. She still wore defiance, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. Kenton didn't bring anger. He brought testimony. One by one, people took the stand. Julian York described how asking for a supervisor left him with a sprained wrist, and how his complaint disappeared. Alan Rivers told how he was thrown to the ground in front of his daughter after being mistaken for a suspect. She didn't speak for days after. Brent's jaw tightened as he listened. Others spoke too. Calm, steady, human. No shouting. No exaggeration. Just truth. And that made it worse, because Brent and Lynn couldn't argue with quiet honesty. Lynn crossed her arms. We've seen the worst of people. We can't hesitate when things line up. Kenton studied her for a moment. Maybe the problem, he said softly, is what you decide counts as a match. Brent's voice cracked. You don't know what it's like out there. People lie, run, threaten. It changes how you see things. Kenton nodded slowly. I know the job is hard, but when the same kind of face keeps paying for other people's mistakes, it's not about danger anymore. It's about comfort. Comfort, Lynn scoffed. Yes, Kenton said. The comfort of assumptions. The comfort of never being the one on the ground. Brent's shoulders sank. Then Ms. Osai opened another folder. 3 reports in the last 2 years show altered or missing body cam footage. One labeled corrupted, another never uploaded. Brent looked up, voice low. That's a tech issue. That's not on us. But even he didn't sound like he believed it. Kenton didn't even flinch. It wasn't on you the first time, or maybe even the second. But now, We're on the fourth. For the first time, Lynn had no answer. The weight of the reports, the footage, and the patterns pressed against her and Brent in ways they hadn't expected. They had always been protected, always shielded, but that protection was cracking now. And Kenton wasn't there to break it. He was just shining a light. A panel member, a former officer herself, leaned forward. Do either of you admit that your actions may have caused harm? Lynn stared down at the table. We've always done what we were taught, she finally said. The words hung heavy in the room. Kenton's voice was calm. Then maybe it's time we start teaching something else. Because once you see the cracks, you can't pretend the wall still stands. The last day of the hearing began quietly. No shouting, no drama. Just the soft shuffle of papers and the heavy air of people who knew things were about to end. Brent and Lynn sat together in their uniforms, but they weren't the same. Brent didn't speak or defend himself anymore. Lynn's arms were crossed, her face tight, but the confidence was gone. Kenton Morrow walked to the center of the room with his folder. No lawyers, no spectacle. He placed it on the table. I've said what needed to be said, he began. You've heard the stories, seen the footage, read the reports. The same phrases, the same methods, the same faces, stopped, questioned, cuffed, and released. He looked at Brent. I don't believe either of you meant harm. But somewhere along the way, you stopped looking closely. You stopped seeing people and started seeing profiles. The room stayed still. I'm not here to destroy your lives, Kenton continued. That's not justice. But this system can't fix itself if it keeps protecting what's broken. He turned to the board. My recommendation is that Officers Halcroft and Mercer be removed from field duty indefinitely, pending retraining, psychological evaluation, and a full audit. I also request the reviewed cases be reopened. Brent looked down. He knew it was over. It was just a job, Lynn whispered. No, Kenton said softly. It was a responsibility. And when you forget that, people get hurt. The board left for deliberation. 35 minutes later, they returned. Officers Halcroft and Mercer suspended from active duty, badges revoked, pending reassessment. Neither argued. No anger. No scene. Just silence. The kind that comes when denial finally gives way to truth. Kenton packed his folder and walked toward the door. He stopped beside Brent. I didn't think it would end like this, Brent muttered. It didn't have to, Kenton replied. But that wasn't my choice. Then he left. That night, Brent cleaned out his locker alone. Lynn never showed. Rumor was she took leave right after. The same people who once celebrated them were suddenly nowhere to be found. Down the hall, a new poster went up, Civil Accountability Hotline, confidential. A few rookies stopped to read it longer than they needed to. The next morning, Kenton was already gone, off to another city, another review. That was his work. Quiet, steady, unseen. Not about headlines, but about truth and repair. He didn't need praise. He just needed the walls to stop hiding their cracks. And finally, someone was watching. 2 months later, the city of Boise had settled back into rhythm. The media had moved on, but under the surface, something was different. Kenton never stayed in one place. His purpose was movement, city to city, case to case. He didn't want fame, he wanted fairness. But his impact remained. Boise's training manuals were rewritten, not drastically, but meaningfully. Officers now reviewed real footage, not rehearsed examples. Kenton's case became one of them. And at every new recruit orientation, one question was added. Have you ever made a mistake and learned from it? It wasn't about blame. It was about accountability. Brent Halcroft took a desk job at the city impound office, quiet, unarmed, unseen. He didn't talk about the hearing. Some said he was angry. Others said he was finally reflecting. Lynn Mercer never returned. She moved back to Wyoming, close to family, off social media, refusing interviews. She didn't fight the decision, but she never accepted it either. Some of the people who'd been wronged finally heard back. Not all, but a few. Julian York got a letter from the mayor. Alan Rivers got a call from the city attorney. No headlines. No big moments. Just small signs that the city had started listening. That's what most people miss. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just someone finally being heard. And maybe next time, when a vague call comes in, someone will pause, ask a question, before making a judgment. Because that day outside the bakery could have happened to anyone. But it happened to Kenton Morrow, a man who'd spent his life watching others be silenced. And when it was his turn, he didn't shout or threaten. He simply held up a mirror. And for once, they had to look. The lesson wasn't that Brent and Lynn were evil. It was that losing sight of people happens quietly, and it's deadly when that blindness wears a badge. Maybe one day, a new recruit will remember this story and choose to pause, to see, to think, to act differently. Because real change doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just walks out of a courtroom with a folder full of names and makes sure it never happens again. If stories like this matter to you, if truth, even when uncomfortable, feels necessary, subscribe to this channel. Every story brings us closer to understanding. Don't look away when it matters.